which comes from Dr. Victoria Kroll, who is CEO and co-founder of eSitu Solutions Limited. Vicky, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. So we'll just start on the next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. So today, really leading on from what you've just mentioned there, we're going to be talking about what hazard perception is. You're all probably aware that it is a test that you have to pass to get your full driver license. But what exactly is hazard perception? Do you think today perhaps I might be able to give you some tips on how to identify hazards that's going to keep you safer on the road, whether you're a car driver or a motorcycle rider? So hazard perception, well, it's several things. First of all, it is a skill that can be learnt. It's also a test, like I mentioned, that you've got to pass to get your full driving license, but it's also something that you can be trained in. And today we're going to cover all of those different things very briefly, starting with what a hazard perception is as a test. So if we move on to the next slide. So hazard perception is what we call a cognitive skill. So that's a mental ability that can help us process information, learn information, solve problems, etc. And over 60 years of research has shown that the skill of hazard perception can be consistently linked to driver crash risk. So those who are better at hazard perception are less likely to be involved in a crash. And because of evidence like this, the DVSA decided to introduce it as part of the UK driver licensing procedure in 2002. Now, in the test that you do, you get 14 clips containing 5, what the DVSA call developing hazards. So this can be defined as something that requires you to take action, such as braking or steering to avoid a hazard. Now, each hazard is given a defined window where you can score between 0 and 5 points. And obviously, the faster you press, the more points you earn. But actually, where should you be pressing if you want to score the most points? So if we just move on to the next slide, I'm going to just show you, this is pretty much, if we just press play on that one, please, it's a video. It might stutter a bit on this, but if I was doing this in the classroom, what I'd normally do is get you all to go shout something silly when you see the hazard, so when you would actually press. So I'll kind of talk you through it as we go through. So as you can see, we're driving along a road and this pedestrian on the right is just about to walk into the road and they are the hazard. So yeah, like I said, if I was doing the classroom, I'd get you all to shout out something silly to say that you've seen the hazard. Now, that's all well and good, but how do we actually, where should we be pressing to get the most points? So if we go on to the next slide, we'll see this is supposed to represent basically all of the frames, so the sort of the clip from start to finish in terms of frames. You can't really see the first one, it's been cut off a little bit, but you'll see what you see is the pedestrian walking down the road and there's a car stopped at the crossing. The black and yellow bars are really depicting where the scoring window would open and close. If we just press the next button on the slide, if that's okay. And this is where you would sort of score your points. So you're pressing within that first bit, your 5 points, your 4 points, etc. So if moving on to the next slide there, we can start to think about actually whereabouts is that developing hazard? Where is the point that you're going to be getting your maximum points in the test? So in the first panel, you can see the guy in the red top is walking towards the crossing, and he is what we would call a potential hazard. Now, if you press there in the test, actually, you'd probably be pressing a little bit too soon and you probably wouldn't get any points. However, it's good that you are noticing that. However, in the second slide on there, what you can see is the guy's turned his head. He's looking like he's about to cross the road. So if you were to press there, that is where you'd be getting your maximum points. And this is really what the DVSA would be calling a developing hazard. Now, on the other one, the final one on the third one, which is the actual hazard, if you press there, you're pressing for the hazard, but actually the hazard's already unfolded. It's an actual hazard at that point. So at that point, you may be lucky to get 1 point, but probably not within that bit. So if we scroll on to the next bit, we've seen that it is a test, but it's also a skill that can be learnt. It's a skill that develops over time, and as you encounter more hazards and survive these hazards, you learn more and more about them. You don't really need talent, you just don't need aptitude, you just need practice on them. So if we take a little look at the next bit and try to break down what exactly hazard perception is as a skill, Well, it's made, researchers have shown that it's made up of several different subcomponents. So that's looking for hazards, identifying the potential clues to hazards, prioritizing them and ranking them in terms of what's the most dangerous thing to happen, and then being able to predict what actually happens next, and finally avoiding them. So we're going to take a little look through all of these different subcomponents really, really quickly as part of this. So the first one is, of course, when you're riding or driving in any scene, you're going to be looking around for hazards, as we saw in that poll. You should be always doing that. So your good drivers are going to be looking around. Your safer drivers will be knowing where, more likely, where the hazards are going to be coming from. So they're going to be looking in those directions. So if we just go on to the next slide, I want to do a little task, which is a little bit difficult when we've not got the interactive one. But I want you to look at the scene and search in the scene for a dog. So you've got about 5 seconds, and I think that the slide should automatically time out. So if we click onto there now and everyone look for the dog in the scene. Hopefully that should cut out in a second. Yes. So I should have put a poll in here as to see how many of you actually found the dog, but I suspect that not many of you actually did, because when I normally do this in a classroom, if you've got 20 people, maybe one of them go, yeah, I found the dog, but most of them go, no. So if we go on to the next slide, it's going to actually highlight where the dog was. Now, as you can see, the dog is on the roof. Now, you might think that's a little bit unfair, which, yes, it probably is unfair, but that's the whole point of this, is that over our years of experience, we've learned that dogs typically are on the floor. We don't find dogs up on a roof. If I'd asked you to look for a cat, you might have looked in the tree, because we know that cats climb trees, mine do anyway, and bring horrible things in, and you might have looked in there. But the point of this is where you look is a big determinant of what you see. And this, if we go on to the next slide, is the whole point. So where you look is a big determinant of what you see. And actually, we learn over our years of experience where things come from. So we learn that certain things appear in certain locations. And it's exactly the same with hazards. Through experience, we learn where hazards are likely to come from. So that's where we're more likely to be looking. So that's the whole point of the silly dog on the roof, is where you're looking. So it's all right knowing where to look, but if we move on to the next slide, we need to be thinking about identifying them as a potential hazard. So on the next slide, we talk about, there's a couple of pedestrians here. So which of these do we think is more likely, which of these pedestrians is more likely to cross the road? Well, the obvious answer is the guy on the left, because he's obviously looking towards us. He's giving you that clue that he's going to cross the road. And many clues to hazards are obvious like that, but some of them are more subtle. So indeed, some experienced drivers might report like a sixth sense for detecting hazards. They might feel that a situation is about to become dangerous, but they don't actually know why. But it's because they're picking up on those clues which they've learned over their years of experience, and that helps them predict the hazards. So if we move on to that, so we've looked for them, we've identified them, and then we need to prioritize them. So we need to make sure that the one we're looking at is the one that's actually going to turn into a hazard. So the next slide shows a video of, if you just press play, I think on that one, it should work. Yeah, so hopefully it plays. And this is taken, the little dot dancing around there is eye tracking, so where someone is looking. So as the scene progresses, you see the car ahead brakes, you're going to have to go round that car. But if you look into your right hand mirror, you can see that there's a car there. So actually that is your hazard there. So you can see that they're constantly looking around. Now, if we're going to replay that video on the next slide, you might have to actually press play on this video. I think physical. Oh no, if you go back and just click on the thing, thank you, sorry. So here, what this is replaying it, but the numbers show represent what the viewer might be considering higher priority in terms of danger, so where they're more likely to be looking, with on obviously being the highest point of danger. So as the video progresses, we can see that the danger priority constantly changes. So some hazards drop in, some hazards drop out, and this is what drivers are doing all the time when they're driving. However, it's probably subconscious. We're always looking for hazards, ranking them in terms of danger, and obviously one is the one that we think is going to be the most dangerous and what is going to happen next with that. And that really does bring to the next point of we know there's lots of potential hazards that could turn into actual hazards, but as drivers we need to judge the relative amounts of danger within each of those clues to be able to predict which one of those is actually going to turn into the hazard. So we're going to go through a little video now on the next slide. So if we just press play, now this is a video playing. Hopefully you'll be able to see it without staggering, and you'll see we're coming to there's a turning and there's a car. So our job is to predict, is that car going to pull out or isn't it going to pull out? So on the next slide, we can think about the different things that might give us a clue to what they're going to be doing. So for example, have they stopped moving? Which way is he going to be turning? Is he going left or is he going right? How busy is the road? And how might oncoming car affect them? And what about the car in the distance? There's lots of things that we can be thinking about as to whether we actually should be predicting whether that driver is going to be pulling out in front of us. And of course, on the next slide, we have to think about if they are going to pull out in front of us and cause a collision, what can we do to avoid them? So we go on to the next one. How might we think about mitigating that? So there's several things that we can do. We can obviously beep the horn, but really you should only be beeping the horn as a warning that you're there. And in this instance, actually, it's probably not the best use of your time. You could accelerate, but I don't think that's going to be very particularly useful in this situation. And also you can brake. Here, of course, if you've got a car behind you, then you need to be wary of that. Or you can decelerate or potentially change lane position. But there's lots of different things that you can do to mitigate that danger if it's looking likely that it could turn into an actual hazard. So let's have a look at the next slide and watch the full video through to see if this person actually did pull out in front of our driver. So if we press play on there, it should play. I don't know what everyone's thinking as to whether they did or whether they didn't, but they did in fact pull out there. Now, I like this one because the keen-eyed amongst you will notice that the car that pulled out in front of us actually has quite a lot of lumps and bumps on the side of them, which suggests to me that perhaps they may have not been so lucky pulling out in front of someone else before. So it perhaps does tell a little bit of a story in itself, but it puts the point in there of that particular situation. So if we move on from, we've learnt about thinking about it as hazard perception as both a skill and both a test, but it is also something that can be trained as well. And we're just going to quickly talk about that. So we move on to the next slide. So hazard perception skills are developed over years and years of experience. So every time we do see a new hazard, we take away some information or some new information from it and store it away in our brains. And whenever we see something similar happen on the road, the theory is that we access that hazard memory from our memory store to help us predict how the current situation is going to unfold. But how exactly does that work? Well, I've got a little video here that explains the kind of natural process of hazard development and how this is emulated in hazard perception training. So when you're watching a hazard perception test, for example, you're watching lots of different hazards over and over again. So actually, when you're watching something for the first time, it's getting, just press play on that video there. We take that instance and we file it away in our brain to help us guide our future responses. Similarly, if you see a car doing something bad, again, it's can be filed away in the brain, and we file away lots of different hazard scenarios that we encounter, and we learn from each of these so that we can extrapolate rules from them, so that when we see something similar in the real world, we can use those rules to help us guide how that situation is going to unfold. And that's really the beauty of hazard perception training, is that we can kind of fast track that learning, that seeing all the different types of hazards that happen on the road, and it's helping us build our internal memory store, our internal rules for how these hazards might happen when we encounter them on the real road. So it was really there designed to help speed up the process of learning hazard perception. Now, a lot of this I've been speaking about is obviously been taken from viewers of pictures of cars, videos of cars, and there isn't actually at the moment any specific motorcycle hazard test for CBT riders. They don't actually have to do a test as part of their CBT. However, you do have to do one as part of your full motorcycle license, and you do sit the same one as a car driver would going to do their license. However, as a company and in collaboration with National Young Rider Forum, with support from the Road Safety Trust, we have developed a motorcycle-specific hazard test, which is going to be launched with a CBT provider to provide supplementary assessment and training. So really to just help some pre-learning for young riders to learn to help fast track that process of hazard perception. And if we go on to the next slide, there is an example of it, hopefully with the sound turned down because it comes on very loud when I play. Yeah, you can see this one's going far and focus. There we go. And this actual clip, I believe, ends with where you should be positioning yourself. So it's got a button response like the traditional test, and at the end it has a question that relates to where you should be positioning. And I think for that we generally provide like a top-down view of it, but tapping into lots of different elements of hazard perception. But yeah, I just thought I'd give you an example of it just to show you that it is different from the car ones. But I think that is all from me, unless anyone's got any questions.